The years 1996 and 1997 were a turbulent period for Marvel Comics, marked by bold experiments, major crossover events, and behind-the-scenes struggles. These years saw headline-grabbing events like the Marvel vs. DC crossover, where two comic book giants clashed in fan-favorite showdowns. Events like the massive Onslaught Saga would reshape the Marvel Universe and its characters, followed by the controversial Heroes Reborn reboot, which handed some of Marvel's biggest titles over to popular former artists to reimagine them from the ground up. Meanwhile, Operation Zero Tolerance brought a darker, more intense storyline, focusing on the mutant persecution that tested the loyalty of fans. All these efforts unfolded as Marvel faced serious financial challenges and uncertainty about the company's future. This video covers those pivotal 2 years, examining how Marvel's attempts to innovate and attract readers reflected both desperation and creativity, and how fans reacted to those choices. Welcome to Every Marvel Event Ever, Part 6. Let's get into it. By 1996, Marvel and DC had both spent decades dominating the superhero market, and occasionally throwing a few jabs at each other across the racks. But for one wild moment, they decided to throw down together. Marvel vs. DC was a 4-issue miniseries that didn't just ask who would win, it let the fans decide, literally. The outcomes of key several battles were left up to a reader vote, and yes, that went about how you'd expect. The premise is big and dumb in the best way. Two cosmic brothers, each representing their universe, Marvel and DC respectively, suddenly become aware of each other's existence and immediately do what all cosmic beings do: force their most popular superheroes to fight to the death. Whichever universe loses the most battles will be erased from existence entirely. So yeah, the stakes are high, even if the logic is non-existent. There were 11 major battles. 6 were determined by the creative team, and 5 were decided by the fan ballot, which meant the most popular characters were going to win regardless of how the fight actually made sense. Aquaman defeats Namor by literally dropping a whale on him. Robin beats Jubilee using the old cape decoy and tripwire strategy. Thor knocks out Captain Marvel by intercepting his transformation lightning. The Flash outruns Quicksilver, and Silver Surfer annihilates Green Lantern with a single energy blast. Then came the fan votes. Superman predictably takes down the Hulk in a slugfest. Batman beats Captain America in the sewers thanks to a lucky splash of water. Storm defeats Wonder Woman after Diana decides to try to level the playing field by dropping Thor's hammer and introducing one of Wonder Woman's worst costumes of all time. Meanwhile, Spider-Man webs up Superboy, and Wolverine defeats Lobo in a bar fight that happens almost entirely off-panel. Arguably the most anticlimactic fight of the whole series, and still somehow one of the most controversial, depending on who you talk to. With the duel results in, Marvel gets the win. But instead of erasing DC, the universe has a meltdown. This leads into the real novelty of the event, the Amalgam Universe. For 2 months, Marvel and DC published comics under the fake imprint Amalgam Comics, which presented an alternate timeline where characters from both universes had always been merged. Batman and Wolverine became Darkclaw. Superman and Captain America fused into Super Soldier. Doctor Strange, Professor X, and Dr. Fate got tangled into Doctor Strange Fate, the most powerful sorcerer in the Amalgam Universe. Even smaller characters like Elektra and Catwoman got mashed into Cat's side, and fake backstories went deep. Fake Golden Age reboots, fake crossovers, even a fake Crisis event called the Secret Crisis of the Infinity Hour. There was even an amalgam parody of Crisis on Infinite Earths number 7, with Super Soldier cradling his sidekick's corpse. Best part, Marvel and DC played it completely straight. Books were treated as if they've always existed. Editorials talked about the classic stories that had never happened. It was bizarre, immersive, and kind of weirdly brilliant. Eventually, the character Access, an original creation meant to act as a bridge between the worlds, helped separate the two realities using fragments of Darkclaw and Super Soldier to restabilize the multiverse. The event ended with Batman and Captain America confronting the Cosmic Brothers and convincing them to stop the war. Final message: the universes are different, that doesn't mean they can't coexist. As for reception, Marvel vs. DC was an enormous commercial hit. The first issue alone reportedly sold over 1 million copies. It was a genuine crossover moment, not just in story but in pop culture. Kids, teens, and longtime collectors all had something to say about it. Battle results sparked heated debates in comic shops for months, and while critics weren't exactly calling it a literary triumph, they largely agreed it was fun, fast-paced, and packed with enough spectacle to make up for the lack of depth. The Amalgam comic one-shots were surprisingly well received. Titles like JLX, Magneto and the Magnetic Men, and Dark Claw Adventures were praised for the creativity and how committed they were to the bit. A second wave of books came out in 1997, though by that point the novelty had faded. Still, this brief window where the big two got weird together left a permanent mark on comic book history. In fact, a complete DC vs. Marvel omnibus collecting the entire crossover and all one-shots were finally released last year in 2024. And to this day, there's still a small but vocal chunk of fans asking, why can't we get Darkclaw back? Who knows? This may not be just nostalgia. Reports confirm that Marvel and DC are teaming up again in 2025, kicking off with 2 one-shot crossovers, Deadpool/Batman in September and Batman/Deadpool in November. Your guess is as good as mine if we'll ever see those characters again. Let's start with a little behind the scenes context, because this one didn't come out of nowhere. Onslaught was the brainchild of writer Mark Waid and artist Andy Kubert. Editorial direction from Bob Harris, during a time when Marvel was desperately chasing sales with one line-wide event after another. Core concept? What if Professor X's suppressed psychic darkness and also Magneto's repressed anger, cause sure, why not, fused together into a giant armored psychic god named Onslaught, who could fight everyone, wreck the Marvel Universe, and sell a ton of comics. Simple. The idea was big, too big. It ballooned quickly into a full-line crossover spanning X-Men, Avengers, Fantastic Four, Hulk, Spider-Man, and several unnecessary tie-ins probably didn't need to read, but might have bought anyway because the covers look cool. It was also created with an endpoint in mind, continuity reset that would let Marvel kill off most of their major non-mutant heroes and launch the infamous Heroes Reborn reboot, where characters like Iron Man and Captain America would be handed over to Jim Lee and Rob Liefeld in a separate continuity pocket with belts and shoulder pads. Now, for the actual plot, Onslaught first shows up as shadowy force manipulating things behind the scenes, like kidnapping Franklin Richards and using Nate Gray to boost his power. Eventually we find out that Onslaught is Professor X, or more accurately, Professor X possessed by the worst parts of himself and Magneto's brain, which he psychically absorbed all those years earlier in X-Men number 25 after mind-wiping Magneto in a rage. That moment, meant to be triumphant, turned out to be the trigger for Xavier's slow breakdown, and Onslaught was the result. The X-Men try to stop him, but Onslaught just keeps evolving. He sheds his armor, becomes pure energy, builds a massive psionic citadel in Central Park, and declares war on all of humanity. He's essentially a mutant supremacist now, but wrapped in the language of peace and unity, which makes him even creepier. The Avengers, Fantastic Four, and Hulk all join the fight, and it still barely makes a dent. Controls Sentinels, kills or incapacitates some of the most powerful beings on Earth. It's chaos. At one point, Jean Grey reads Xavier's mind, confirms what no one wants to hear. Professor X is still in there, fully conscious, watching everything, trapped inside the monster he created. It's one of the most disturbing details of the whole saga, and a rare moment where the story actually leans into its horror potential. Eventually, the only way to beat him is through a mass sacrifice. All the non-mutant heroes, Cap, Iron Man, Thor, the Fantastic Four, dive into Onslaught's energy form to burn him out from the inside. It's treated as a noble death, but really it's just a soft exit for the upcoming Heroes Reborn line. The only reason Hulk survives is because he was technically mutated enough to not count as fully human, and even that's debatable. The Onslaught Saga was supposed to be tragic, sweeping, and profound. What it often was instead was overstuffed. The concept of a dark Xavier had real potential. By the time the tie-ins started piling up, you needed a flowchart, 3 backups to keep track of who was doing what. That said, there are genuinely memorable moments. Xavier's mental collapse, Hulk physically separating Banner from Onslaught with a single punch, and the sheer audacity of killing off almost every A-list hero in one go. Even fringe titles like the Green Goblin and Punisher had to nod toward it, whether it made sense or not. Reception was divisive. Some readers were into the scale and the dramatic weight of it all. Others thought it was bloated mess that tried to do too much, relied too heavily on mystery box marketing, collapsed under its own weight. The fact that it directly fed into Heroes Reborn, project driven by editorial panic rather than creative necessity, didn't help. But if nothing else, Onslaught proved Marvel was willing to blow everything up to get your attention. And for better or worse, it kinda worked. The end of the Onslaught Saga was a big moment in Marvel history, not just for its in-universe destruction, but for what came after. In the wake of Onslaught's defeat, Fantastic Four, the Avengers, Iron Man, and Captain America were presumed dead. But in truth, they'd been transported into a pocket universe, created by Franklin Richards, effectively giving Marvel a chance to reboot these characters outside the confines of their continuity, and more crucially, outside the hands of their usual team. Marvel still technically published Heroes Reborn. Creative control is handed off to two of their former Golden Boys, Jim Lee and Rob Liefeld, working through their Image Comics studios, Wildstorm and Extreme. So even though Marvel logo was on the front, the content inside was coming from a very different place, both stylistically and creatively. Think more pouches, more guns, an anatomy that made you question whether anyone involved had ever seen a human body in real life. This was the birth of Heroes Reborn. It was part marketing stunt, part Hail Mary. Marvel's core non-X-Men titles were struggling. Captain America and Avengers were no longer pulling in readers, so why not give them to the guys who'd helped define the bombastic 90s aesthetic? In this new universe, familiar origins were rewritten. Captain America's past was redrawn, the Fantastic Four's mission reshaped, and Tony Stark's identity refreshed. Continuity was modernized to fit the era, jettisoning the Silver Age baggage for gritty redesigns and new world rules. It was a soft reboot dressed in hard abs and shoulder pads. But while Heroes Reborn offered a bold solution to Marvel's creative slump, it was also a symptom of desperation following Onslaught. The universe had just imploded, literally and figuratively, and this was Marvel's attempt to build something new in the rubble. But off-panel, readers were divided, and often furious. Fan backlash was immediate and fierce. Liefeld's run on Captain America was a lightning rod, criticized for widely exaggerated anatomy and bizarre designs. One infamous image of Cap with hyperinflated pecs and microscopic head became emblematic of all things wrong with 90s excess, sparking memes, parodies, endless ridicule. This Reddit comic sums up the event bluntly. I was so excited about Heroes Reborn, and even as a 14-year-old, I knew this comic was horrible. Not going to lie, I was so turned off by Liefeld's depictions that I never had the urge to read this. 100% garbage. Critics noted that the change felt unnecessary, particularly since Captain America had been thriving creatively under Mark Waid and Ron Garney. Fans were understandably upset that a critically praised series was taken away to make room for that. Reviews and retrospectives have called the event a boneheaded punchline and a failure of timing and taste, especially amid the speculator crash. Liefeld's two books, Captain America and the Avengers, were hit hardest by fan backlash and slipping sales, so Marvel pulled the plug on his contract after 6 issues. Titles were handed off to Lee's Wildstorm Productions, where the Avengers were given over to Walt Simonson. And even though the experiment was planned to run 12 issues per title, James Robinson was brought in to write the 13th and final issue for each of the 4 series. That finale, titled World War III, served as a Wildstorm versus Marvel style send-off, rebooted characters against each other in a climactic battle that somehow made even less sense than how they got there in the first place. In the end, the whole thing wrapped up with Heroes Reborn: The Return, a 4-issue miniseries that brought the characters back to the main Marvel universe, thanks once again to the reality warping powers of Franklin Richards. Just like that, the Pocket Universe was gone. The new continuity was swept under the rug, and the Marvel Universe just moved on, more or less pretending it never happened. Except, of course, for the fans, because nobody ever forgets that Captain America chest. Ultimately, Heroes Reborn exploded into public consciousness, boost sales temporarily, and force a conversation about what Marvel heroes should be. Fans largely rejected the extreme redesigns and heavy-handed editorial shakeups. While the line sold well initially, its critical reputation and legacy remained mixed, and in many corners flat out negative. When the smoke cleared, the heroes returned home to the main Marvel universe and the peace treaty was signed, but the scars of that year remain, testament to the volatility of creative ownership and fan expectations. Following the chaos of Onslaught, Marvel launched Operation Zero Tolerance, a sprawling crossover event that unfolded across the several X-Men related titles, including X-Men, X-Force, Generation X, Uncanny X-Men, and even Spider-Man. At the center of it all was Bastion, a terrifying fusion of mutant hunting machines, Nimrod, and Master Mold, reborn with one purpose: to eliminate mutant kind by any means necessary. Bastion led a covert, government-backed purge against mutants, targeting not only the X-Men, but anyone with mutant DNA. The event ramped up paranoia, political manipulation, and brutal battles, with mutant heroes scattered, captured, or on the run. Bastion was created when Master Mold and Nimrod were forced through the Siege Perilous and merged into this new being. He infiltrated political circles by aligning with the anti-mutant group Friends of Humanity, led by Graydon Creed, who gained influence with key figures like Senator Robert Kelly. Bastion's plan was to secretly embed thousands of Prime Sentinels, humans fitted with nanotechnology, become mutant hunting cyborgs throughout the population, ready to be activated to eradicate mutants. mutants. The X-Men uncovered hints of Operation Zero Tolerance months before it became public. Gambit and Phoenix infiltrating a Pentagon gathering. Bastion was too shrewd to be fooled and too quickly identified the spies. In the wake of the Onslaught catastrophe, which saw the apparent deaths of many heroes and intensified anti-mutant sentiment, Professor Xavier was captured and held prisoner by Bastion. The assassination of Great and Creed further inflamed the hatred that gave Bastion political leverage. As Operation Zero Tolerance officially launched, Bastion's forces struck the X-Men during their return over Colorado. Despite fierce resistance, the mutants were captured and taken to a secret facility in New Mexico. Bastion publicly announced the task force as a legitimate effort to protect humanity, broadcasting footage of the attacks to manipulate public opinion. Meanwhile, the mutant team scattered across the country faced brutal challenges. Generation X was hunted and nearly wiped out in California. Jubilee was captured and subjected to memory extraction, and Wolverine escaped assassination attempts. The X-Men discovered the horrifying extent of the program, including the clinic of Dr. Prospero, which was transforming ordinary people into Prime Sentinels without their knowledge. Operation Zero Tolerance also caused uneasy alliances and betrayals, like Moonstar's double agent role within the Mutant Liberation Front and the unexpected aid of the Israeli mutant Sabra. As the crackdown intensified, key figures like Senator Kelly began to question their support for Bastion, eventually pushing to the program's shutdown. S.H.I.E.L.D. was called in, leading to the final confrontation in New York. Bastion's forces were defeated and ordered to stand down. The X-Men escaped, though not without casualties and lasting trauma. Cyclops was found to have a bomb implanted in him, requiring urgent medical care. Jubilee and other mutants struggled with the fallout of the brutal campaign. In the aftermath, Bastion briefly escaped custody, only to meet his apparent end at the destroyed Prospero's clinic, setting the stage for future mutant threats. Operation Zero Tolerance was a mixed bag for fans and critics alike. While it brought intense action and high stakes, many readers felt overwhelmed by the sprawling crossover that required jumping between multiple titles to follow the full story. The event's darker tone and brutal treatment of beloved characters, especially relentless targeting and imprisonment of the X-Men, divided the fan base. Critics often pointed out that Bastion, though menacing, felt like a one-note villain driven mostly by cliché mutant-hating motives. Some also criticized the event for relying too heavily on shock value and mutant persecution tropes, without adding much depth or nuance to the story. The extensive use of Prime Sentinels, while visibly striking, also contributed to a feeling of oversaturation and repetitiveness in battles. Additionally, the event was seen by some as a setup for other stories rather than satisfying standalone art. Despite the criticism, Operation Zero Tolerance succeeded in raising the stakes for the X-Men universe, setting up new dynamics and consequences that reverberated in subsequent comics. It remains a significant, if somewhat controversial, chapter in the late 1990s X-Men saga. And that's part 6 of every Marvel event ever, covering 1996 and 1997. 2 years when Marvel Comics wasn't just telling stories, it was surviving them. Heroes Reborn wasn't merely a bold creative experiment, it was a sign of how far Marvel was willing to go to stay in the game. Handing over the Avengers and Fantastic wasn't just outsourcing, it was practically hitting the reset button on decades of continuity. And the result, a mix of sales spike, fan backlash, internet memes, and one of the most infamous Captain America drawings in history. Meanwhile, Operation Zero Tolerance offered a darker reflection of Marvel's core themes, took the X-Men's ongoing struggle for acceptance, and escalated it into something more paranoid and systematic. Prime Sentinels could be anyone, your neighbor, your friend, your doctor, and behind it all was Bastion, a villain created not just from 2 killer robots, Marvel's own continuity-consuming machine. Looking back, these weren't just events, they were growing pains. Marvel was in the middle of a financial freefall, creators were jumping ship, and fans were burning out. These stories tried to make sense of the chaos, sometimes succeeding, sometimes collapsing under the weight of it. But even now, in their flaws, they're a window into a publisher that refused to stop experimenting, no matter how messy things got. So, what do you think about the events in 1996 and 1997? Were the events signs of Marvel losing its way, or were they necessary weird steps you had to take in order to survive the 90s? Let me know down in the comments, and be sure to stay tuned for part 7, where things are going to get even more complicated. Thanks so much for watching, and as always, I'll catch you in the next one.